Hi everybody, this is Cynthia. We're going to be talking about the Bandhas today. Let's give ourselves a moment to check in with the Bandhas in mind. And it's especially important, it's always important, but it's especially important to come into that natural seat, right? Where you are equally weighted in your two sitting bones left and right, and your tailbone in the back, and in your pubic bone in the front. So if you close your eyes, you can feel that rooting left, right, back, and front. And then that natural lift of the pelvic floor that happens when your pelvis is neutral. And you can even explore this for a moment. You can tip your weight kind of back towards your tailbone, which is how we tend to sit when we're in the car or doing our work. And can you feel how there's less attunement in the muscles at the base of your pelvis? And then if you shift back to even, like those four corners of a tent, it's almost like you're pegging those four corners of the tent down, and then the center of the tent just naturally rises, just naturally lifts to support your spine. Maybe you don't even feel that in your pelvic floor. Maybe you feel that at your heart or at your shoulders. They can relax a little because your spine is held. Become aware of your breathing. Pranayama is very important to the Bandhas. The breath work and the anatomy of the breath. So as you inhale, you can feel your diaphragm muscle, that umbrella with the handle in the back. Inhaling and feeling it moving down, activating down into the belly. And as you exhale, it releases back up toward the heart. Gently tugging the heart down when you inhale, gently putting pressure on the organs below it. And as you exhale, putting that squeeze back up in the heart, the lungs, and releasing the organs so that blood flow can move in there, oxygenate, detoxify the organs. Take just about one more minute here, noticing this natural rhythm. Take a full breath in and open your mouth, exhale it out. Gently opening your eyes here. Now, I have to admit that the Bandhas are one of my favorite topics in yoga. I love the Bandhas. I love what they do for the energetic body, what they do for the physical body. I love how they seem to bridge so many of the layers of the subtle self with so many of the layers of the physical self. It really is a bridge, okay? Just like the breath is a bridge, these Bandhas are is kind of like the structure of the bridge, so to speak, right? And this is a good time to bring up the fact that in yoga, in general, this is a big topic actually, in general, the practices of yoga start off way more physical, and then the advanced practices actually are way more subtle. So for example, when we chant mantras, even when we chant the sound Om, we only start by chanting it outwardly. Om, over and over again, right? But the far more powerful practice is when it becomes silent. And then when it becomes so silent that it just becomes that humming background to your awareness of life. It's the same thing with the bandhas, right? Where at first you might actually be exercising muscles. You might be doing something that looks a little bit like Kegels. You might be doing these intense exhalations of, and then pulling your belly button back and up, right? That's bandha work, right? But then eventually, the practice becomes much more subtle. And instead of like gripping your muscles, it becomes almost an intentional focusing on these gates in your body. It becomes an awareness of the rhythm that's already there, right? It's not so much about toning the physical body. It's about this energetic kind of container from the throat to the pelvic floor, and how that container is supporting the subtle body. And you don't need to constrict anything. You can just kind of direct your attention to it at a very subtle level. And there it is. There's your practice of Mulabandha or Uddiyana Bandha or Jalandhara Bandha, okay? So many of these practices start off bigger. You can even think of it going through the kosha layers, the layers of the subtle body. In, right? At every layer of the self, every layer of the body, you can practice all of these practices, okay? So physical body is only one way of practicing the bandhas. There are 3 main bandhas that we work in your typical yoga practice. Depending on the tradition, the lineage, and who you're talking to, they're going to say different ones are most important. Certainly in the teachings of Iyengar and the schools that came from him, he would say the most important bandha to work first would be Jalandhara Bandha, the throat lock. And that's because at the subtle body layer, you are cultivating what is sometimes referred to as like the nectar, the inner nectar of the divine, which is Amrita. And it cycles up and down the spine. We've talked about Sushumna Nadi, we've talked about Kundalini, right? But essentially what you're trying to do is stop yourself from leaking your vital force. This is part of the reason, by the way, that brahmacharya and sexual celibacy was so important to the yogis, is because if you leak your sexual energy, I mean physically, if you leak it, then you are not able, you're leaking, your energy field is leaking. And so stopping that and then redirecting it into the torso and into the body, you're sending divine power up and down your spine. Okay, so there's definitely a lot of esoteric information when it comes to the bandhas, because you stop it up at the throat, you literally lock your throat, you lock your pelvic floor, and then you have an inner spiral of this Amrita. And then at the diaphragm, you have the heat. We know that breathing deep can build heat, right? We know that Ujjayi breath, part of Ujjayi breath, natural breath, is all about building the fire. And the gut represents the fire, so you're really fanning that flame. Well, in that fire, you're burning out negative karma, you're burning out negative energy, and then you're sending the positive through in its cycle. So it's really, the bandhas are all about like block leaks at the bottom, block leaks at the top, and then cultivate this energy within the center of the body through the spine. Bring the impurities to the fire, burn them, and then replenish the lake of the mind. So then when you unlock the throat, when you unlock the pelvic floor, you're kind of replenished and more clear, okay? Mulabandha, the pelvic floor, is all about lifting impurities, or mala, up into the fire of Uddiyana Bandha. And then Uddiyana Bandha, or the great flying lock, kind of like the great wings of a bird, burn that and then send it up. And then Jalandhara Bandha kind of prevents the Amrita from falling back down. So then you lock it and it's all nectar in the head, right? That was the esoteric explanation of the bandhas. What are Bundes? Like, what does the word actually mean? There's actually a lot of definitions, and they're kind of funny because there's so many words to describe Banda. Lock, not the kind of lock you find in a door, but the kind of lock you find in a canal, right? Which can open and it can close. And when it opens, it lets something through. And when it closes, it stops that. So not like the lock of a door, but like the lock of a canal. Foot, it means like the lowest part or the foot. It can mean fettering. It can mean to bind together or close. So to bind or hold. So there's a lot of there's a lot to the word Banda, right? It's essentially to tie in, to capture, to hold, to tether, or the lowest part or the foot, okay? The Bandhas are natural diaphragms in the body. They always go along with the natural diaphragm in the body. Essentially, these natural diaphragms include in the throat, we have a deep diaphragm. It's very cool when you look at it. When you look at this anatomically, you're kind of like, is that the pelvic floor? It's the throat. You have the diaphragm under the rib cage, and then you have the pelvic floor diaphragm. These are natural diaphragms in the body. So the yogis knew where our natural diaphragms were, and they were making use of those diaphragms, kind of like little bellows bags, right? You'll see that we in the West have kind of manipulated this idea for the purposes of physical asana, and we've added 2 minor bandhas, which is the hand, Hasta Bandha, and the foot, Padabanda. We'll come back to that later, but just so that we're all very clear, the original bandhas are really only these three, okay? Jalandhara Bandha, Uddiyana Bandha, and then Muladhara, the 3. So they're almost always associated with natural diaphragms in the physical body. To reiterate, when activated, these locks can send the fire of Agni is fire, upward to purify and cleanse the energetic centers of the physical and the subtle bodies. You can think of a bandha as that which moves and deepens our oxygen, that which fans oxygen into a fire, and therefore increases and directs that fire for the purpose of purification. So quite literally, there is a physical purification happening in the work of the bandhas. Mula Bandha, pelvic floor lock. As you could probably figure out, if you thought about it for a second, Mula Bandha has a slightly different location in men than it does in women, right? We have different anatomy in our pelvic floor, okay? So for men, the root lock is really isolated right at the center of the perineum, like right at the center of the perineum. You have this access to the pelvic floor, which is actually a little bit less complicated than it is in women. For women, Mula Bandha is originated kind of right around where the cervix is, a little higher up, okay? So we don't need to get too anatomical. That's not really my job here. We don't need to get like too detailed here, but just to note that the pelvic floor is different in men and women. Or I should say in the male body and the female body, right? Because I don't, whatever you associate with in terms of gender and gender fluidity, that needs to be respected, right? But in terms of physical anatomy, the placement is going to be slightly different depending on where your physical anatomy is and where that bandha is located, okay? Uddiyana Bandha is the next one up. It literally means the flying upward, right? Flying upward lock. I always think of it as the 2 wings of a bird. And usually when you see this practiced in a yoga class, you kind of lean forward, you take a breath in, you punch the breath out really strong, you hold empty, and then you suck your belly up toward your heart, okay? So you are literally hollowing out the belly. When you do Uddiyana Bandha and you pull your diaphragm up that powerfully, that intensely as a physical practice, you are also engaging Mula Bandha. They're going to engage together because the diaphragm of your breath and the diaphragm of your pelvic floor, they link together in the breath. So you can practice Mula Bandha independently. You can do some Kegels, you can do some like pulling up of the pelvic floor. Equally important to relax Mula Bandha as to engage it. I think we don't remember that often enough. I think we tend to think, just engage it, just engage it, just engage it. That's not good for your pelvic floor. You need to relax your pelvic floor as well as engage. It's like any other muscle system, right? But when it comes to the primary diaphragm breathing muscle and Uddiyana Bandha, when you're doing a deep Uddiyana Bandha practice, it's going to be both bandhas. So you do them together, right? Jalandhara Bandha is the throat lock. A jala is a net. So you're literally catching your breath at your throat. You're catching it like a fisherman catching with a net. And then you're taking that energy, catching it, and then cycling it back into the furnace. The primary pose to deepen and practice Jalandhara Bandha is shoulder stand. Iyengar calls shoulder stand the mother of all poses. In fact, he went even further than that. Iyengar said that shoulder stand, Salamba Sharvangasana, because of Jalandhara Bandha, by the way, because of this, was the single greatest boon, the single greatest gift that yogis have conferred upon humanity. Okay. So he really, really respected Jalandhara Bandha. It was a very important part of his practice. And sort of similar to shoulder stand, you have bridge pose, which preps us for shoulder stand, right? So in bridge pose, part of bridge pose is actually lifting the chest to the chin so that the chin gets locked by the lift of the sternum. So it's a back bend and it's a really supportive pose, but that's another Jalandhara Bandha pose. Typically, when you inhale, you relax your bandhas. Typically, when you exhale, you constrict and then engage them. Let's try this. Let's give ourselves a moment here. Sit upright in your spine, close your eyes. Inhale, draw your breath all the way down to your tailbone. Begin your exhalation and lightly draw your low belly back and up, feeling not just Uddiyana Bandha engage, but also the pelvic floor gently lift. And then at the top of your exhalation, gently drop your chin toward your chest. Let the sternum rise to meet. And then let that go. And inhale your breath all the way in. Breath comes in, all the way down, everything is relaxed and open, very important to release. And then as you exhale, light engagement at the pelvic floor, light engagement at Uddiyana Bandha, low belly drawing back and up. It's that little J shape, back and up. And then at the top of that exhalation, drop your chin to your chest. Letting the chest rise a little to the chin. Let that go. And do that a couple more times on your own. You can make it more powerful by exhaling your breath out and pulling upward and locking it in. You can make it less powerful physically and more subtle body by really almost just thinking of these canals, these locks in the body. Very little movement is necessary. Just a light, energetic toning. Play around with both if you can. Make sure you relax fully on the inhalation. And take one more. Relax. Open your eyes. When we breathe, we're not breathing into our belly physically. We're breathing into our lungs and we're breathing into our diaphragm. So the breath is a rib cage breath, not so much a belly breath, right? But energetically, having tone and also softness at the belly is part of the breathing practice. So you both have the ability to relax completely, which the Bandhas are reminding us of, and to pull back and up and strengthen completely. So the short answer to how is it that I can breathe down into my diaphragm, but I can't really feel that into my pelvic floor? The short answer is, well, you're never going to breathe into your pelvis. You're never going to breathe into your belly. What you will become aware of, physically, from a physical standpoint, what you will become aware of is that diaphragm putting pressure on those organs of digestion and elimination, and even putting pressure on the pelvic floor. And then you'll feel the exhalation softening that pressure, and then there's that buoyancy that comes in. So you have the tenacity of the engagement, and you have the softening of the disengagement. And that brings us back to that all-important Yoga Sutra, the Sukha Sthiram Asanam. Softness and the strength, both equally present in the asana, in the posture. You're able to use strength, you're able to use softness, and there's a balance between the two. That has a lot to do with the breath. It has a lot to do with the Bandhas practice. And then little by little, with the curiosity, with the focus, you can feel, maybe it's not the breath, but maybe it's just an energy or an inner connection or almost like an inner thread of continuous awareness all the way down into the belly and the pelvic floor and then back up and out. It's just as damaging to try to only breathe at your belly and forget your rib cage. Your rib cage will like constrict. That's muscle that needs to be worked. That's energy. That's chakras. That's subtle body that needs to be worked. It's just as damaging to only do belly breathing than it is to only do rib cage breathing, right? So what we're trying to do here is pay attention to the whole body. Pay attention to the whole form. If you've only biased this, then spend some time a little lower on the belly. If you've only biased the belly, then pay attention bringing the whole thing back, right? So that your breath is a living and moving symphony through the form, through the self. And do the bandhas connect to the chakra system? Yeah, the whole subtle body is connected, right? So Mula Bandha is Muladhara Chakra. And it's manipulating not just Muladhara, but Svadhisthana just above it. And for sure, Uddiyana Bandha is all about, okay, this is actually really fun. Manipura, seat of the jewel, is your third chakra. That's your fire center. And Anahata is your wind or air center. Maybe that doesn't make a lot of sense until you start listening to the bandhas and you realize that what you're doing between these two is you're using the air and the oxygen to fan the fire, to purify and clean out. So you are fanning like a bellows. You are fanning the fire. You're literally taking the oxygen and doing this and fanning the fire so the fire kicks up. By the way, Manipura is also where all of our personal shit is. Our sense of personal empowerment, our sense of, we hold a lot of trauma here. We hold a lot of, all our personal power. Where if you feel empowered or if you feel agency or if you don't, that's right here. You gotta burn out the karmas. You have to burn out the impurities And so on an energetic level, the bandhas are really working with the chakras. We only have the minor bandhas left, the minor ones. Sort of bandhas. Here we go. Hasta bandha, the hand. Well, actually, if you cup your hand, so if you were to turn your hand up and then like you're holding a large marble or one of those like kids bouncy balls or something, it would fit right there in that diaphragm. This is Hasta Bandha, okay? When you are in a yoga posture, this relates to the yoga practice proper of asana, especially as we perceive of it in this world, okay? Now, I'm gonna plug my favorite book one more time because I'm gonna use it. When you bring your hand onto the mat, onto a surface, onto the ground, one thing that we tend to do is we tend to flatten the palm. We tend to just flatten everything out here, okay? Hasta Bandha reminds us this is a diaphragm. Just like the breathing diaphragm, this is a diaphragm. There's a dome here. We need to use it. The work is to press the knuckles of the fingers down while pulling the center of the palm up. And when you're, say, in a downward facing dog and you're pressing your knuckles down, but you're not flattening the center of your palm, you're actually pulling the center of your palm up energetically, it saves your wrists. It gives you an energetic connection into your arm bones all the way up through the shoulders, the neck, and the spine. Okay, so Hasta Bandha, you can try this, try it. Put your hands on something, put your hands on a wall, put your hands on the floor, maybe even go weight bearing onto your hands and see if your tendency is to flatten your palm out. And then what does that do to the health of your wrist? How does that feel in your body? Right? When you create that diaphragm, when you create that lift, that natural lift, you actually get really strong in the fingers of your hand. In the muscles of your hand. You start to get really strong. And then that strength supports everything, right? So Hasta Bandha is a great tool in our physical practice. Just like Uddiyana Bandha, just like Mula Bandha, just like Jalandhara Bandha. And then we have Padabanda. A lot of times in a yoga class, you'll have a teacher instruct, one of the first things when you're standing is root down through the four corners of your feet. Depends, 4 corners or 3 corners of your feet. So if it's 3, it's the base of the big toe, the base of the pinky toe, the ball of the foot, and then the center of the heel. And if it's 4 quarters, it's ball of foot, big toe, pinky toe, but then it's inner and outer heel. Hasta Bandha, the arches are a little more natural. We actually have 3 arches in our feet. We have the arch that goes across the toes, which is the transverse arch. We have the medial arch, which is the inner arch that we typically think of. And then we have our lateral arch, which is the outer arch. And you don't want to be collapsed in any of your arches. Here's going to be our little practice for this session. We're going to do a little bit of foot arch, essentially Padabanda work, okay? So come up to standing. And then bring your hands onto your legs. And you're not going to be able to see me, but hopefully you can do this practice. What I'd like you to do is stand with your feet underneath your hips. And go ahead and lock out your elbows if you need to. And then look down at your toes. So your toes are pointing straight forward. You're not turned out, you're not turned in. Your toes are in line with your knees. Everything feels healthy, you're stable, whatever. You're stable. Now, if you pick up all 10 of your toes, just pick up all 10 of your toes. Keep the ball of your foot on the ground. Knees are good and bent. Knees are bent. Pick up all 10 of your toes. Did you notice the arches lift? The inner arch, the outer arch lift? You should especially notice the inner arch of the foot lift because the inner arch, it's pretty obvious. So set the toes down and do that 2 more times. Lift up the toes, Try to stay connected to the base of the big toe. Try to stay connected to the base of the pinky toe. Then set your toes down. Do that one more time. Pick up all 10 of your toes. Now, this is the exercise. This is the fun stuff. Keep your toes lifted. Keep the ball of your foot on the ground. Spread your toes wide. Imagine for a moment that you're on the beach and you want to pick up some sand with your toes. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to spread our toes really wide. Look at the sand between those toes. Then lower your toes into that imaginary sand and scrunch it up. Scrunch it up into the ball of your foot. Without dropping your imaginary sand, keeping the scrunched up toes, pick your toes up. Keep the ball of your foot down. Stay scrunched. Bend your knees more if you need to, right? This is like literally a bent knee, almost a chair pose, but you're supported. Then spread the toes, place them down. Gather the sand, scrunch it in, pick it up. Don't drop it. Spread your toes, lower, gather, scrunch, pick up. Don't drop. Spread wide, lower, gather, scrunch, pick up. Release. Do that 2 more times on your own. So you're doing this with the foot. You are scrunching and then picking it up without moving the ball of your foot. So if I put my hand here, so my hand is the ground, now I'm picking up, I'm spreading, I'm exercising all of those arches, okay? Does anybody feel how hard it is to do that? Maybe it's even impossible to do that in your body. Maybe you need to work on one foot at a time. Maybe you feel the muscles in your calves or you feel the muscles at the bottom of your foot. Essentially, you're working Padabanda by doing that, okay? So you're building the strength in that diaphragm. That bottom of the foot diaphragm. I'll often say to you, if it's hard, make it part of your exercise routine. Because having stable feet, strong, stable feet, and having that buoyancy upon the earth is really important, right? We just are so unkind to our feet. We just scrunch our feet into shoes and don't let them exercise. And then we let the shoe do all the stabilizing for our feet. But you can actually rehabilitate your feet, which is good for your knees. It's good for everything because those diaphragms stack on each other. We have little diaphragms in our feet. We have little diaphragms in our knees. We have little diaphragms, if you really want to think about it, right? Like at the femur head and at the pelvic floor. The whole body is in European architecture of ancient cathedrals, I almost think of it as the body is this system of flying buttresses. You have all these arches supporting you and then ultimately supporting your spine as that dome rises up. And so your feet are really an important part of this flying buttress system. Exercising the feet, you do want all 3 of your arches lifted. When you're rooting, essentially it's a rooting and rebounding principle, okay? So when you're standing in mountain pose, yes, you do want your arches healthy because you're rooting down into the 4 corners of your feet, but then what's rebounding? Well, it's the arches are rebounding, right? So there's a rooting and then there's a blossoming upward, okay? My suggestion to you, if that was hard, nobody's gonna know that you're exercising your feet at the dinner table. Just kick off your shoes and scrunch your toes a bunch. Nobody's gonna ever know, Maybe I'll give you little reminders next time we meet that you can always kind of sit there and scrunch up your toes. But there's always opportunities to strengthen. These are minor bandhas, right? The hasta bandha, the padabanda. They're kind of like those outer layers of those flying buttresses. And really what we want to focus on are those inner ones. where you're actually dealing with energy. You're not dealing so much with the physical, you're really dealing with the multi-layered physical and energetic body. But it's worth bringing them all up, because at some point you're going to hear somebody say that term. And it's a support term. And it just means that the Bandha is the arch. Okay. Let's give ourselves 3 minutes here just to close our eyes and feel into all of these different domes in our body. A few minutes here. You can come into a light Bandha practice at the base of the exhalation. Maybe it's just an intention, an invisible Bandha practice, an energetic practice. Maybe it's visible, maybe it's physical. From the perspective of the Bandhas, notice that you can see it from the physical body. You can see it from the pranic body. Feel the energy move. You can feel the impact on your mind, your thoughts, your emotions. That deep inner listening, that deep inner intuition. And then that deeper core of sweetness at the center of the heart. Like you're just gently massaging all of the layers of yourself with this rhythm. Bring your hands together in front of your heart, feeling the two little diaphragms at your hands, where you can press, where you feel that rebound. And bowing into yourself. Coming up. Vata Yoga Anushasanam, Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha. This is where your practice begins. Thank you, everybody.